Hi and welcome back to Module 2, Organisation in Living Things, and today we're looking at the circulatory system. So in your booklets, if you'd like to follow on, it's on page 59, and you can highlight some of the important things as we go through, just as a form of active reading. So let's get started. So we're looking now at transport systems. Now we looked at these in plants, where we looked at the xylem and the phloem that were used to transport the nutrients and the water throughout the body. The transport systems in humans and multicellular organisms is a little bit different. So the cells of our multicellular organism require a constant supply of nutrients and oxygen, and they also need to remove their waste products. And our circulatory system is the most efficient way that we can do this. So what is the role of the circulatory system? Again, you've covered this in Year 8 and may have an understanding of it anyway, but we're going to cover it again and recap. So our circulatory system is going to transport the digested food and energy throughout the body. It also transports hormones. You can see a spelling mistake here in my PowerPoint where it actually transports oxygen, transporting heat throughout the body, and then removing the metabolic waste, so transporting that back to the lungs for removal, and it also acts as a little bit of a defense system for the body. Now, our transport system involves our blood. Human blood has a temperature of about 38 degrees, a little bit higher than our body temperature, as it is transporting heat throughout the body, and also has an alkaline pH, so about 7.5 there. Now, the volume of blood varies from person to person, but in an average human, it's about 5 litres of blood that we have. Now, we need to maintain these conditions of our blood for it to function, or for the body to function normally, and our enzymes also to function normally. Now, what makes up our blood? Now, we've talked about red blood cells already. So our red blood cells are what are responsible for carrying fresh oxygen through the body and removing the carbon dioxide. Now, red blood cells make up about 40 to 45% of our blood. You would have also heard of white blood cells, and that's a real part of the immune system, detecting and fighting viruses and bacteria as they infect our body. And there's a number of different types of white blood cells, and we might look at those a little bit later when we look in Year 12 at diseases. But white blood cells make up about 1% of blood, so not very much at all. Then the main part of our blood is plasma, and it transports nutrients, hormones and proteins, and it's a yellowy liquid making up about 55% of our blood volume. And then we also have our platelets. Now, platelets are really important in stopping us bleeding. It makes the blood clot so that we don't continue to bleed there. So if we look at our red blood cells, another name for those is erythrocytes, and we've seen red blood cells already. They're a thin concave kind of shaped cell with no nucleus. So because they've got no nucleus, they can't divide, reproduce, so forth. So they live about 4 months. And they're made in the marrow, in the ends of our long bones. So if you think of our arm and our upper leg bone, our femur, and your typical bone shape, when you think of a dog bone even, they're talking at the ends of those is where we'll make our red blood cells. And our blood looks actually red due to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is red, and it's our oxygen transporter. So looking then at white blood cells, and I think I'm going to be in the way here. I'm going to move up here. They're called leukocytes. Now, there's a whole range, and you can see there's 5 different sorts on the right-hand side there. They're larger than red blood cells and are colorless. Now, they're one of the major defense mechanisms against pathogens that might enter our body. So they might produce antibodies to fight bacteria. They might devour the virus or the bacteria. And when it does that for bacteria, it produces our pus. Now, there are several different types, as you can see on the right-hand side, and each one of those will have a specific function, but for the moment, you do not need to know that. Now, our white blood cells live in tissues as well as blood and have a variety of, or lengths of different time that it will live for. Some could be minutes, days, and some could even be years. So another component of blood is our platelets. Now, they're also formed in the marrow of bones, and their main role is to aid in the clotting of blood. So what platelets do is they produce a chemical called fibrinogen, which sends out little thread-like structures like fibers to trap the blood cells to stem the flow of blood. So what will form then is a scab. So you can see here in our picture, we have our red blood cells, and they're quite numerous, and you've seen some blood slides before. Here we have our white blood cells, and again, they only make up about 1% of our blood, so it's understandable that we're only going to see a couple in a smear there. And you can see over here we have our platelets, and they're really quite small. So they do play a role. Some people are missing a factor VIII in their blood, which prevents their clotting of blood, and then will require certain injections to make sure that if they do in fact have an incident where they are bleeding, that their blood will clot, and so that they don't bleed out. So going across now to plasma, you can see here in the image on the right a picture of plasma, and as we spoke about before, plasma makes up about 55% of our blood volume. So you can see that the red blood cells have settled to the bottom. There is a slight barrier between the red cells and the plasma, and the plasma is that straw-coloured liquid that you can see at the top there of that test tube. So in that barrier is where you're likely to have your platelets and your white blood cells there. So in the plasma, we've got our plasma proteins, some nutrients. Again, it helps carry through the gases, the waste product, and the ions, and so forth. So what we're going to do next is view a blood slide and find some white blood cells and draw some pictures of those. You can draw those in your booklet. That's it for today. We'll talk another time. Bye.